So this person here is Charlie Peters. Many of you probably don't know who he is. He's a GB news reporter. He's supposed to be an investigative journalist, and he's been looking into the grooming gangs in this country. And the thing is, and myself, and there's others looking into this, Danny Roscoe, he's done a video on this. I'll leave a link to his video in the bar. Many of us saw through this as soon as it started to happen. I saw through it, it was probably about a year ago, when GB News started pushing this guy forward as the guy who was exposing the grooming gangs in this country, which I called bullshit on at the time, saying that no, he wasn't the one that was scooping this story. Tommy Robinson has been doing this since the early 2000s, trying to expose what was going on in this country when people didn't want to listen, when people were calling him a racist and far right for talking about this issue. And the only reason that Charlie Peters can talk about this issue now is because Tommy Robinson paved the way for him to do it. And I'm not going to see Tommy Robinson excluded from history by people like this, who in my opinion are just standing on the shoulder of a giant and then claiming the glory and basking in that glory of all the work that Tommy Robinson has already done on this subject. Now we're going to go and play this in a bit, but I just want to give a bit of background on this guy and what I think of him. I think he's establishment through and through. This is GB News trying to take control of the narrative and rewrite history about Tommy Robinson and make it as though they're the ones that have broken the story about grooming gangs in this country and not Tommy Robinson. And you can see that in the interview. This is what they're attempting to do with Tommy Robinson. And the ironic thing is, in this interview, he talks about being labelled far right for talking about these issues, and the lack of self-awareness with this guy is off the scale, because within the interview he then goes on to call Tommy Robinson far right. He says he's from the extremes of the right, which we all know is absolute nonsense. It's rubbish. He goes on to repeat certain things, allegations made about Tommy Robinson that simply are not true. He calls, at one point, even says that Tommy Robinson isn't a journalist. Anybody can be a journalist. If you go out there and you start reporting stories, you're a journalist. It's as simple as that. Just because he's not been to university or doesn't have a posh accent like this guy, doesn't not make him a journalist. Yes, Tommy Robinson has a horse in this race because it's personal to him, because he's had a family member who was sexually abused by these people. That's why Tommy Robinson is so passionate about this subject. To this guy, it's just a news story. It's just a way forward to make a name for himself in journalism. To Tommy Robinson, it's personal. He wants to see actual change in this country. But I digress. We'll carry on. We'll watch what this guy has got to say.
Because of what it shows our priorities to be, what it shows the state to be, and fundamentally, the state thinks you are an extremist if you think the things I do about this. A leaked report confirmed that just recently. That a Home Office department, RICU, which is the Research and Communications Unit, they think that caring about alleged grooming gangs, their language, not mine, is an example of far-right extremism, right-wing extremism. But it's not, it's a problem and it's real. It's happening now. 4,000 victims, 500 arrests, 1 year.
So the state thinks that if you care about innocent boys and girls being raped by Pakistani rape gangs, that makes you far right and a racist.
Yeah, absolutely.
How disgusting is that?
It's revolting, but it's achievable insofar as the only voices who've wanted to talk about this for so long have been right-wing or extreme right-wing, or whatever you want to call it.
That's a load of rubbish, because this is when he goes on to talk about Tommy Robinson, right? So Tommy Robinson isn't far right. That's been established. If you look at Tommy Robinson, he's pretty much liberal. He's probably centre left, if anything. Tommy Robinson, he's not extreme right at all. And this is how it's done. This is how they try to take control of the narrative. We're not far right, but the only reason they're labelling us far right is because actual far right people are the only ones that have been talking about this subject. And this is where he goes on to talk about Tommy Robinson.
You know, a name we've not mentioned yet, I often get criticised for not mentioning his name. Tommy Robinson. He cares a lot about this issue. He has spoken about it a lot. Now, I don't think he's a good example of someone to get things done on this issue, because he nearly collapsed a set of trials in Huddersfield in 2018. He was very...
That's not true. That's simply not true. He was outside the court, and all he was doing was basically reading off his phone what the BBC had already reported about the case. He wasn't saying anything new. The case was already over. The people had already received their sentences on this situation. So that is just complete misinformation on his part. It's like, you know, you're supposed to be an investigative journalist. Surely before you say these things, you should investigate them to make sure what you're saying is true. But he doesn't care about that, because he's trying to push the establishment narrative that Tommy Robinson is far right and a danger to this topic. He shouldn't be on this topic because he's the one that's endangering the cases in talking about it. It's all about rewriting history. It's all about this guy taking control of the narrative away from Tommy Robinson and saying, look, I'm the one that's doing this correctly. Now, ask yourself a question. Do you really think this guy has principles? Do you really think if this guy had his documentary banned by a judge, do you really think he would have the conviction and principles to play that documentary anyway so people get to hear the truth? Because I don't think he would. Do you?
very critical. He was very much criticised for that because he filmed some defendants as they were leaving court. As I said before, a lot of trials are linked. You can't report on one until the other is done because of contempt of court in this country.
The case was over. They were receiving their sentences. I just want to bring this up on screen as well, right? Just to clear some things up. Tommy Robinson has never been tried by a jury. They've only ever thrown contempt of court charges against him because they know they don't need a jury to convict him. They can just throw him in front of some activist judge and they'll just throw a lengthy prison sentence at him. And we've got to look at the recent one, which was a civil contempt of court offence, and they threw him in jail for 18 months in solitary confinement. And yet this guy doesn't speak out against that. None of them do. None of them will speak out against the actions that the state has taken against Tommy Robinson on this situation that is unjust and could be potentially illegal, allegedly, the way they've treated him in prison. They don't want to talk about that, because if they talk about that, then they're painting Tommy Robinson in a good light, and that's the last thing that these people want. They want to smear Tommy Robinson as much as they possibly can to shut him down. The ironic thing is, as well, this guy's new documentary series that he's got coming out is called Silenced from Telling the Truth. Silenced in big capital letters. It's on screen right now. So you tell me that they're not trying to take control of the narrative. Do you really think it's a coincidence that this guy's new documentary series for GB News is called Silenced from Telling the Truth? And it has nothing to do with the fact that Tommy Robinson's banned documentary is called Silenced. Because if you can't see the connection, then there's no help for you.
If you're a journalist, you know about that. Tommy Robinson isn't a journalist, he's more of an activist, and so he didn't know about this.
Tommy Robinson is a journalist. He's done more documentaries on this situation. He's taken more flack for telling the truth on this topic than you ever will. You snot. I'm sorry, but I get angry. He's just a snotty-nosed school kid, isn't he? In my opinion. He's got no clue. Came straight out of university. Watch the whole interview by Triggernometry. I'll leave the link to it in the underbar. Go and watch the whole interview. He came straight out of university with a journalism degree and then started working for GB News on this documentary. He has no real world experience like Tommy Robinson has. He's not lived in Luton where these gangs are prolific or anything like that. He has no personal interest in this other than he is a journalist. That's it. And unfortunately, you have to have some kind of connection to these stories to make you passionate about them. And I don't see passion in this guy whatsoever. And what came across to me in the interview, and this is all subjective of course, is that all he cares about is getting no, like getting recognised for the documentary that he's making. He even admits in this interview that he held back on certain stories. Instead of releasing the stories anyway, he waited before the stories could get traction. And he only wants traction because it's putting him in a limelight as a journalist. Tommy Robinson doesn't do that. He just tries to get the truth out there to everybody, doesn't he?
Perhaps that was his defence. But he's certainly almost collapsed more trials than he's instigated, okay? So, I also, like you were saying about the Islam thing, I think he ties it more into an anti-Islam agenda than a proper looking into this approach. I think too many people do that. They latch onto this because they care about Islam more than they care about what's really going on. The uglier truth is actually so much worse than this being a religious thing. In a way,
and this is why the establishment are pushing this guy forward. It's because he's trying to separate the Muslim grooming gangs away from Islam. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to separate the two. They're just trying to say, oh, it's just Pakistanis that are doing this. And it's because they're in clans that came from Pakistan. It's got nothing to do with Islam or anything like that. It's all about distorting the narrative and giving out misinformation. We all know what Islam says about infidels and kafir and about how they are less than cattle, and you basically, under Islam, you're allowed to take sex slaves. That's why ISIS are doing it in Iraq and other places. They take sex slaves from their enemies. And this is exactly what's happening in this country through Islam, the ideology. But these people just want to dance around that. They don't want to admit that because they want to be seen as progressive. It's a load of bollocks, absolute bollocks. It's misinformation. They're not doing anything to further this situation. They're just trying to cover it up further. They're trying to cover up the fact that Islam had nothing to do with it. They're a part of this. They're a part of the cover-up, as far as I'm concerned. Look at what they're trying to do. They're trying to distance Islam from the grooming gang situation, and they're trying to smear the main person who is trying to bring this to the public's eye. They're a part of this. And nothing will convince me of any differently. And I'm sure that Danny Roscoe feels exactly the same way. Go and watch his video too. I'll leave a link to that in the bar as well. Go and watch that. Because these people are disgusting. They really are. They claim to be fighting for the victims of these grooming gangs, when in reality all they're doing is trying to be gatekeepers for Islam, protecting Islam all the time.
I wish it were, because religion is easier to remove than clannishness. Okay, I think people become.
What is that? Clannishness. If you're an investigative journalist, right, you're going to look into this. You're going to think, right, they form clans. So what is the ideology that keeps these clans together? Now, he says in the interview it's because of first cousin marriage. That makes these families, more intertwined and more loyal to one another. But there is another reason. It's Islam. These people have Islam as a religion. And yeah, not all Muslims are extremists. But like Bridget Gabrielle said, the silent majority are irrelevant. It's the minority that are doing this that are the issue. And they have managed, between them, even though they're a tiny minority, they've managed to rape and traffic thousands upon thousands of English, Sikh, and other nationalities of girls all around this country. So to say that Islam has nothing to do with this is just stupid and ridiculous, because Tommy Robinson has looked into this, and we've seen the evidence for it. At its very core is Islam. We've seen certain mosques that have been involved in this, but this guy doesn't mention any of that because he's trying to push the establishment narrative. He's trying to protect community cohesion, as he tries to call out in this interview, but he himself is doing it. By trying to remove the Islamic element from this, you're covering for the people and the ideology that is behind all of this.
Secularised in Britain over time. I don't think that's true of this community in this way, what they're going through. So it's been very easy to deride people as far right or as extreme, because the only voices doing it have been, let's be frank, on the extreme of society.
And again, smearing Tommy Robinson as far right. They're not far right. You know, you yourself have been called far right by the media for doing this. And yet you can't make that distinction in your head thinking, well, if they're calling me far right and I'm not far right, then maybe they're doing it to other people who have also been trying to highlight this issue. But that's not happening because the guy has an agenda. His agenda is to smear Tommy Robinson. Otherwise, this guy, in any logical world, would be standing side by side with Tommy Robinson and saying, you know what this guy has been doing for all these years is amazing, and the way that he's been treated by the state is absolutely despicable. But he won't, will he? Anyway, that's all I've got to say on this. Leave your comments below about what you think about this. But I can't let this stand. I can't let GB News and this guy basically rewrite Tom Robinson out of the grooming gang history by painting him as a dangerous element within it, that is a danger that destabilises grooming gang cases. Tommy Robinson has done more in his lifetime to highlight this issue than anybody. And like I said before, I'm going to reiterate this. The only reason why people in Parliament and people like this guy can talk about this topic now without fear of retribution is because Tommy Robinson paved the way in doing it. He brought it to the forefront in doing this. And I would say Elon Musk has done more than this guy to highlight this situation, because Elon Musk had the balls to repost Tommy Robinson's documentary and give him the notoriety and the acknowledgement that he deserves, which is something that these people will never do. This is Vindicator, signing off.